This first hand here is from the 50k Super High Roller. The hands and the tournaments are in chronological order. So we have Cutoff opening to 2.5x. Cutoff is a European middle-aged regular who, to my understanding, is mostly a live pro. I do know who it was, but my policy with these small and well-defined field tournaments is to not say names unless I know the individual on a personal level and I've asked them and they've given me permission to use their name when they're villain in a video I'm making. So Cutoff opens. We are in the big blind with 40 big blinds effective. ICM not really consideration at this point in the tournament. We're still pretty far from the money. And I would continue by calling here 99+% of the time. I tend to use a very polarized 3-betting strategy in this spot, so definitely not including hands like Queen 8 suited. If you do want to have a strategy that includes some 3-bet bluffs that are 1 high card, 1 low card combos, I would still not suggest 3-betting a hand like Queen 8 suited. I think a hand like King X suited works a lot better than Queen 8 suited because we're dominated less by Cutoff's call versus 3-bet range. I think Ace Queen will potentially be a substantial part of it. So King X does better than Queen X, and if you really want to have some Queen X combos in your 3-bet bluff range, then I would suggest using hands such as Queen Deuce or Queen 3 suited over Queen 8 suited. The 8 does help us when we flat with our hand, but it's really not doing much for us when we 3-bet and get called. Yes, the 8 does make our hand a little bit more connected, but the way in which it makes our hand connected is not very useful to us. If you think about the flops and turns that you get to barrel when you turn a gutter, those are boards which really Cutoff does well on with his flatting range. So if the board is Jack XX and the turn is a 10, yeah, we turn a gutter, but that's not a particularly appealing spot to be barreling when we consider Cutoff's call versus 3-bet range. And I think that in these narrow range situations, you also have to consider kind of the effects of coolers. So the only board that Queen 8 makes it straight on is Jack 10-9, and Cutoff is flatting probably all combos of King Queen versus our 3-bet, which is all in all a very substantial part of a pretty narrow flatting range. So those are some things to consider when you're designing your pre-flop 3-betting strategy. I called and we flop top pair and a backdoor flush draw. I check as I would with probably my entire range here, and Cutoff bets on the small side, but maybe kind of standard sizing. And I think my only option on the flop is to continue by calling. The turn brings the ace of diamonds, and this turn is certainly better for Cutoff's range than it is for my range, so I check as I would with, again, my entire range, and Cutoff now bets 52k. And I think that this is a very interesting bet size. It doesn't look objectively big. Betting 52 into 91 seems pretty normal, but I think given kind of context and dynamic and just game flow of this tournament and high buy and live MTTs in general, I really got the feeling that this was on the bigger side, especially when we compare turn sizing to Cutoff's flop sizing. And what I think this does is I think it very much polarizes Cutoff's range on this turn. So I don't really see Cutoff betting Ace King or Ace 10 ever for this size. Those are hands that I think have quite a lot of incentive to be betting smaller to basically get called by Queen X, but also hands like Jack 10, King Jack, So top pair good kicker hands don't have a lot of incentive to bet huge. Even a hand like ace queen, or let's say ace jack, if he decided to c-bet that on the flop, I don't think has a lot of incentive to bet relatively big. So when he bets this size, I think his range is bluffs that are really looking to maximize their fold equity, and some very narrow values such as pocket deuces, potentially pocket jacks that would make sense to bet for this size, and maybe sometimes king 10. As far as what his bluffs could be, he opens fairly loose, so definitely all the king x backdoor flush draw combos. Potentially he could just be betting king x, no backdoor flush draw, just king 3 of spades sort of hand, although I think that's somewhat unlikely. 10-9 makes a lot of sense, 10-8 makes a lot of sense, 9-8 is possible, and the wheel draws I think are also in his range, although I do think that would only be 4-5 suited in this spot. So that's kind of a rough breakdown of his range. So versus this bet size, I called, feeling pretty comfortable with it. I think I would much rather call a bet of this size on the turn than I would a bet of, let's say, even 44k. A single big blind shouldn't make that big of a difference, but I think in this spot it does. And the river is a complete blank. It's a 6 of clubs. Of course I check, and cutoff bets 90k, which seems very incongruent with his turn sizing. The hands that he would want to kind of relatively bomb, I know 52 into 91 isn't really bombing the turn, but the hands that would want to bet relatively big on the turn would, for value, would want to continue betting big on the river. And this bet just looks like it's going for some thin value, which I'm very skeptical about the cutoff having a hand that would go for thin value, because like we talked about, those hands I don't imagine are really a big part of his turn bet set or turn bet when he bets for this size. So not really sure what hands to put into a value range for him. Although, yeah, it's just, this bet is just so incongruent with his turn sizing that I'm really not sure what to think of his value range. However, bluffs definitely have an incentive to be betting for this size, because he could be repping kind of a wider value range and just trying to get me to fold a hand like Jack 10, King Jack, Queen 10, King Queen, hands like that. So I called feeling pretty comfortable about it, and I was right. He had 10-9 off, and so we have a picture of happy me. This is a spot where, looking back on kind of the turn and the river action, it's a spot that normally I would go into, you know, counting combos and going through the specifics of what he can have for value, what he can have for bluffs, and finding enough bluffs to put into his range to warrant calling with the pot odds that were given. I didn't in this spot because I think the bet sizing is a lot more important. And it's very, not that it's hard, it's just not really useful to go through kind of a combinatorial analysis when our assumptions are so flimsy. So, you know, does he have King 10 for the nuts in his river range? Yeah, maybe, but how many combos to that do we even assign when we have such a strong read that relates to bet sizing? So this is just a spot that I wanted to have a very kind of different approach to when analyzing, at least different from the normal approach that you see in my videos.